Good evening, comrades. Thank you for joining us for our second session in our general election series. We're looking at Marxists and elections, and tonight we're discussing the Labour Party, really important subject, and lots of different views on the left about it. So we want to discuss, hopefully with you from the audience as well, can we still vote for Labour? Maybe just some of the more left-wing candidates. Should we put conditions forward about the question of Palestine? Should we call for the unions to disaffiliate? To do what then? And with the unions still remaining affiliated, is it still a bourgeois workers' party, as Lenin called it, or is it not because the left has now entirely been defeated? We want to discuss some of these issues with our main speaker, Jack Conrad. He is from the Communist Party of Great Britain, weekly worker, and author of the book In the Enemy Camp, Using Their Parliament for Our Revolution. Thank you, Jack. You're going to speak for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to open up for discussions and questions from the floor. And I hope there's going to be a discussion, a good debate afterwards on the role of the Labour Party. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Well, I think it's useful to begin just by thinking back not so long ago when a lot of comrades on the left were looking at Keir Starmer and his new leadership and looking at Labour's ratings in the polls and looking at its poor performance in various by-elections, and also, which I personally found slightly amusing, making the prediction that it was impossible for the Labour Party to win. Not only was Keir Starmer, quote unquote, useless and wasn't interested, apparently, in getting into number 10. He was only interested in hammering the left, but it was impossible for the Labour Party to win simply because of the statistics. No other party has come from such a defeat as in 2019 and then gone on to win a general election. Well, okay, I was never convinced by that. Statistics are very useful, but life should be our main source of information, or predictions for that matter. Okay, so as things look today, and of course things could still go disastrously wrong for Keir Starmer, it looks like we're on our way not only to a Labour victory, and Keir Starmer getting the call from King Charles in Buckingham Palace to swear him in as Prime Minister. But the speculation is really how big the Labour Party majority will be. You've even had Grant Shapps talking about the danger of the Labour Party getting a super majority. I don't know if that's a technical term, but we sort of know what he means, don't we? So that's where we sit at the present time, and then we get into what should we do about it. Well, my own take on that is, well, we can do very little about that now. If we look back to before 2020, if we look back at the years of Jeremy Corbyn after he was elected, or indeed even before he was elected Labour leader, I think that the left was given, how should I put it, a gift from heaven, which we could have used, but unfortunately we didn't. And indeed, to make things worse, not only did we have a witch hunt, but that witch hunt was conducted in good measure by the apparatus around Corbyn and with the approval of Corbyn himself. And we had Jenny Formby, for example, boasting about speeding up the number of people who were going to be disciplined, the number of people who were going to be suspended or expelled. from the party. So to all intents and purposes, we came out of the Corbyn period, that brief moment of opportunity, and we hadn't carried out any fundamental changes in the Labour Party. You know, the rules about barring left-wing organisations affiliating remained. The whole question of deselection of MPs. Okay, there was a little bit of alteration there, but just note in the run-up to the 2019 election, as far as I know, no sitting Labour MP was deselected. Anyway, back to today. What should we do? I think really what we should be doing today is about what we want to be doing tomorrow and the day after. What sort of perspectives have we got? Not just to affect a pretty routine general election, but how do we go about changing society? That's surely what we need to be asking ourselves. So my own angle on that is that we aren't going to carry out any fundamental changes in the Labour Party without a mass Communist Party, or at least a Communist Party of some sort of social weight and size. But I do think that we shouldn't dismiss the Labour Party in terms of the years to come as a lost cause. It might be. That shouldn't be discounted. There's no possibility of doing any serious work in the Labour Party today. But as I said, I wouldn't discount that simply because the trade unions remain affiliated. And I think there's every possibility of left-wing ideas really coming back to the Labour Party, for example, through the trade unions. Okay, so my fundamental proposition is that the Labour Party remains, to quote Lenin, a bourgeois workers' party. And that isn't just because the trade unions sort of give it the workers' angle. I think it is worthwhile sort of thinking through what the trade unions do for the most part. Well, what they actually do for the most part is the bourgeois economics of the working class. They treat, that's what we do, we sell our labor as a commodity, and trade unions are there to fight, at least they should be, that we get the best bargain that we can from employers, that we get the least onerous conditions and the best protection that we can get from bullying and harassment and sackings because we happen to be a trade unionist, for example. So the trade unions, yes, founded the Labour Party, and they founded it in that sense in their own image. And trade unions, in and of themselves, don't see beyond capitalist society. Their version of capitalist society is a fair day's work for a fair day's pay, where, for example, a socialist would actually question the wages system itself. Socialists would look upon the wages system as being a form of slavery that is fundamentally no different to serfdom, feudalism, slavery, or what have you. Okay, so the Labour Party remains a bourgeois workers' party. Does that affect how we should vote come July the 4th? Well, my own take on it is that I would certainly be urging people to vote for independent left candidates. Of course, that covers an enormous variety of different sins. I'm primarily thinking about Jeremy Corbyn, but of course, he's not the only, ex-Labour MP. But I'd also back myself, the various confessional sects, the various left organisations that are standing candidates. So all things being equal, if, for example, I was in Coventry and we had Dave Nellist as a candidate against some typical right-wing candidate, I'd absolutely have no hesitation in voting Dave Nellist. In my own area, as I understand it, we have, for example, a member of the, George Galloway's Workers' Party. And in the last London elections that I voted in, I voted Sadiq Khan, but I also voted, not because I've got any faith in them, not because I take them seriously. I voted for the Socialist Party of Great Britain. I don't know what result they got. I presume it was the sort of usual left vote of 1, 2, maybe more percent, but I doubt it was more than that, simply because I think it's a good thing to present voters with something that passes for socialism. I think it's a good idea to have a left vote. It's true, of course, that in our conditions in Britain, at least when it comes to July the 4th, we're dealing with a first past the post system. Nonetheless, where the opinion polls are today, we're not going to have a decisive effect of swinging it one way or the other. The Labour Party will win. The Tories, not least because of reform, not least now with Nigel Farage, look like they're going to lose on the one side to the Labour Party. Keir Starmer's been pursuing a policy of triangulation, but also from the right to reform. Quite frankly, it looks like not the end of the Conservative Party. I think that would be a foolish conclusion, but it looks like the Tory party is on course for a historical hammering in this election. Now, okay, there are some comrades on the left that do call for a Labour vote. Sometimes it's a Labour vote across the board. Sometimes they're picking on candidates such as Jeremy Corbyn, who they call a credible candidate, but they dismiss the non-credible candidates. And if you look at these comrades, their argument goes along, roughly these lines: that any Labour government is better than a Tory government. I'm not convinced by that argument at all. In terms of my experience in politics, the best government I lived under was the government of Edward Heath, when he pushed through his Industrial Relations Act. This was a period of where we had 2 miners' strikes. We had the Pentonville Five, who more or less deliberately defied the Industrial Relations Act and said, come and arrest us. They came and arrested them. They locked them up in Pentonville jail. And the left was out there agitating for workers to come on strike, a political strike. And that is what happened. The TUC was threatening a one-day general strike if they weren't released. And lo and behold, was it the official solicitor? That was my memory. I mean, I was young. I'd never heard of the official solicitor. Either way, they came out of Pentonville jail, carried, on the shoulders of comrades. And yes, then that sort of period ended with the second miners' strike. I remember sitting there in the dark, no TV, candles and all the rest of it. But Ted Heath came on and said, who rules the country? Is it the trade unions or is it your elected government? And went to the country on that basis and was resoundingly defeated. So in other words, to me, it's not so much a question of weighing up this government against the other, which is going to be a bit nicer to us. I think that's a profoundly wrong approach to take. No, it's about strengthening the working class, and the working class can strengthen itself under all sorts of parties of all sorts of different colorations. Indeed, I'm not arguing, by the way, that this means you shouldn't vote Labour, but we do know that when you get a Labour government, because of its relationship with the trade unions, there's a tendency for trade union officials to do deals with the Labour Party that don't benefit the working class. So to complete my story about the defeat of Edward Heath's Conservative Party, of course, it led to the social concordat and the winter of discontent and the election, of course, of Margaret Thatcher. But of course, there's another approach from comrades on the left that says, well, okay, I'm not voting because the Labour Party is promising what in this election? To be slightly more competent or very much more competent than the incompetent Tories. No, what I'm voting for is the expectation that millions of workers have got in the Labour Party, in the expectation that we will trigger, a crisis of expectations. Well, I hope you can get from my sort of tone of voice that I find that utterly unconvincing. Keir Starmer isn't promising anything big. He's not even promising the sort of constitutional reforms that we saw with 1997 New Labour and Tony Blair. But I do remember that period because, again, there were comrades that were saying we should vote Labour across the board because, look, this will encourage the rise of hope. This will encourage the working class to organise. And indeed, there were wide sections of what you could call the far left that were expecting a social explosion, what they called a crisis of expectations. Now, I'm not sure, maybe comrades in the audience will know, from my knowledge, that phrase came into existence with the events or after the events in France in 1936. We had moves in France, from the far right, from the fascists, an attempt to storm Parliament, for example. But we also saw the unity of the left. In my view, it was an unprincipled unity because it was about managing capitalism. But leave that aside, what we had is a government of radical socialists and the Socialist Party supported by the Communist Party of France. Now, just like in the United States, what happened in France, or what happened then in France, is you had this sort of interregnum between people casting their votes, knowing what the results were. I think that was May 1936. And then you have the actual formation of a new government, something like a month afterwards. And in this interregnum, what you had is a massive strike wave, a general strike. You had workers occupying their factories. And what you had is a get together at the end of it between the government, the trade unions, and the employers, where the employers granted huge concessions to the trade unions. I know it doesn't seem that much nowadays, but a 40-hour week, which in France was something. I also think you had the sort of move towards le weekend. You had paid holidays. You had massively increased trade union rights, for example. Power of shop stewards was recognized. The employers definitely didn't like it, leading indeed to some of the bourgeoisie actually welcoming in the Nazi armies into France. They were viewed as preferable to the militant Bolshevik working class that carried with it the threat of revolution. Now, the idea that is what's going to happen after July the 4th, personally. I think that's risible. So it sort of provides a left-wing excuse for voting for what surely will be the most right-wing Labour government in history, not only in terms of foreign policy, but in terms of domestic policy as well. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if we look at Britain's economic situation, it's far worse today than it was in 1997. And although Gordon Brown didn't boast about it, the fact of the matter is the Labour government did spend on the health service, did spend on education. Everything that I see, everything that I hear about Keir Starmer's government leads me to the opposite conclusion. It's quite conceivable that we would see cuts. And indeed, when it comes to the NHS, although you had PFI under New Labour, I really do think there is a distinct danger under Wes Streeting of that whole privatisation, which has been a creeping privatisation, actually speeding up under a Labour government. Okay, so where are we at? 20 minutes so far. Okay, so I'm going to conclude simply saying what my approach would be to voting in terms of the left candidates in the Labour Party. I would vote for left candidates in the Labour Party, but I do think when it comes to us, comrades on the left, we also ought to approach these candidates and say, well, look, we will campaign for you, not unconditionally. I think that given what's going on at the moment in Israel, Palestine, and of course, I'm specifically thinking about the horror in Gaza, that we need clear statements from them, not about will you call for a ceasefire? That is something now that Joe Biden is doing. Clearly, Netanyahu isn't keen on that, will pay lip service to it, but clearly doesn't want a ceasefire, wants this horrendous war to carry on, in my view, at least until November and the US presidential elections and beyond, to the point where Donald Trump in January becomes president if he does, and basically gives the go-ahead for Netanyahu to finish the job, not only in Gaza, but also the West Bank. So I think we need to be asking, demanding of our so-called left Labour MPs, is we should actually be demanding not only do they commit to Britain stopping sending arms to the IDF, but we should also demand a clear statement, no ifs, no buts, but a clear statement from them that they actually condemn Keir Starmer, not just for his disgraceful statements at the beginning of this war back in October about not supplying food, not supplying oil and medicines, but the fact that Keir Starmer has tailed behind Joe Biden at every stage. We actually need these people to condemn Keir Starmer. And we should say, okay, we would call for people to vote for you, but we wouldn't call people to campaign for you unless we have such a statement. Now, as I said, this is a pretty, how should I put it, token gesture. I don't think it's going to affect what's going to happen on July the 4th, but I think it does chart some sort of way forward that we want to be challenging the left in the Labour Party, and I'm talking specifically here of the Parliamentary Labour Party, with hardly an exception, has been completely spineless when it's come to challenging, for example, the witch hunt, but also challenging Keir Starmer over Palestine. So in terms of us coming out of this general election, yes, we need to be looking at having a fight in the Labour Party, and if that means various so-called left MPs showing that they're actually genuine comrades on the left and getting expelled or suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party, then so be it. What is the point of a left winger in the PLP when they're not prepared to stand for left-wing principles, not least principles that lead us to condemn genocide? If they can't do that, what is the point of these people? But also what I would be saying is the key when we come out on the other side is that we don't make the same mistakes that we've been making year after year, decade after decade, and go for some sort of, what would you call it, broad left formation, let alone something, that would perhaps resemble Momentum, which was less of a political organization, more of a privately owned company. No, what we need is a party of socialists, a party of communists, not based on some sort of confessional principles, but on an agreed program for actually fighting for socialism. Yes, we need reform demands under capitalism, of course we do, but we do need a clear vision of ending capitalism, and that doesn't mean calling a reformed capitalism socialism, as was the case in the last two general election manifestos under Jeremy Corbyn, both, not the few but the many, or not the many, whatever, the one I mean, and the last one in 2019. Anyway, that's me over. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you very much, comrade. Comrades, if you have questions or comments, please click raise hand and I can bring you in. There's been a few comments already in the chat and the Q&A, and I'll try to get to them. I'll get the ball rolling as always. I mean, Starmer is getting quite a lot of pressure over Palestine, not necessarily from the media. They are backing him up, but from independent standing, etc. I have seen in one single newspaper actually the fact that he promises to recognize Palestine once he's prime minister, which is sort of interesting because that's not something that the US imperialism would do, or Rishi Sunak would do, or the Tories would do, or probably most other right-wing Labour Party prime ministers. Do you think this will make do you think it's a reflection of pressure he feels from the independents or from his own members, perhaps? And do you think there is, apart from Jeremy Corbyn and perhaps George Galloway, there is a chance of any independents actually being elected? Carol asks in the Q&A, how about Faiza Shaheen, who you mentioned in your opening? Do you think she has a fair chance? Do you think Keir Starmer has a chance? There are some people on the left who expect 20 to 30 independents being elected, which I think is vastly over optimistic. How do you assess that?
Okay, well, I think you make a very good point on the recognition of Palestine question, and I think it's clear, given the reaction of the United States to various allies of the United States, such as Spain, for example, recognizing a Palestinian state, which of course doesn't exist. What we have is Arab reservations that call itself the Palestine Authority. But that one aside, yes, I think that you'll make a good point. And in the same way, my own take on Joe Biden coming out with his latest peace plan, I have read in Socialist Worker that this is a result of the Hamas resistance fighters. I just think that's ludicrous. No, this is about domestic politics. This is for him about November. And I also think you're right by implication, that's what I'm taking it from, that for Keir Starmer, this statement about recognizing a Palestinian state owes everything to July the 4th. Not only the threat from independence, but precisely the possibility, at least, of large swathes of Muslim voters staying at home. And they will be doing, focus groups. They would be doing the number crunching in a far more sophisticated way than I can. I just tend to sort of sniff the air and go, well, this is what I think. I have a hunch that. So I have a hunch on that question. But I suspect all of these things are carefully weighed up. What do we win? What do we lose? But at the moment, I don't think myself that Keir Starmer is too worried about Jeremy Corbyn or votes for other independents or left organisations such as George Galloway and the Workers' Party, even in Rochdale. So, okay, it would spoil his party, and I'd love it if there were 20, 30 independents. But my sniffing of the air, for what it's worth, is I think that's, it's great to be optimistic, but I think it's unrealistic. And then you'd have to ask yourself, by the way, if that actually did happen, would they be able to cooperate? Are they accountable? We've looked at the situation already. We've got George Galloway in Parliament. Okay, not for very long. We had Jeremy Corbyn in Parliament. Did they join the same organisation? Did they put up a coherent platform together? So I'm very cautious. I know Jeremy Corbyn. I know what he stands for. I've got my criticism, but I know what he stands for. But when it comes to independence, we're presented with a whole variety of different people, ranging from someone called Jeremy Corbyn right over, and I met him actually on the demonstration in London on Saturday, to Piers Corbyn. And they're both standing as independents. They both got the same surname. I understand it, they had the same mother and the same father, but their politics are rather different. So yes, of course, I'd love to see a left-winger elected in Chingford, of all places, the seat of Ian Duncan Smith. That shows you something about the change that is taking place in Chingford. I'd love to see an independent elected in Islington North. And I could carry on with that list. But no, my own particular expectation is that it's going to be very hard, because what we're dealing with is a general election. So I don't know. I mean, again, this isn't science, it's hunch. I wouldn't say, for example, that George Galloway is in for an easy ride. I mean, last time he was extraordinarily lucky, wasn't he? I mean, we had the Labour Party denouncing its own candidate. Well, that's not going to happen, I don't think, could be wrong, before July the 4th this time round. So, yeah, again, in spite of my criticisms, and I'm sure we all share those criticisms of George Galloway, of course I want him elected over some, Starmerite creep. But I fear that it might not happen. But even if it did, and we did end up, with 10, 20, God, I'm really getting carried away, aren't I? I would still be cautious about what that bloc could do, because my suspicion would be, if you put into Parliament 20 separate individuals that have no connection other than, an aversion to Keir Starmer and profound sympathy for the Palestinians, they might agree on those two things. But what else do they agree on? It could be very little. And therefore, this whole movement, and that's my fear around Palestine, which has been, profoundly moving for me, just going on every demonstration in London. They really are inspiring. But my fear is that this movement could easily be dissipated Yes, it's good that we have candidates standing in the name of that movement, but we need something more. We need something serious. So if these independent comrades after July the 4th, issue a call for a new party, and if that party is democratic and minorities have the chance of becoming majorities, I would urge everyone to join such a party. But again, just being on the cautious side, I do remember Momentum. And not only was it privately owned, but the democracy with the approval of Jeremy Corbyn, I'm afraid to say, the democracy was reduced to a clique type democracy, a plebiscitary democracy, which I think is a travesty of democracy. We don't just want an atomized membership sitting in front of a computer going, yes, no, yes, no. That's not my understanding of democracy and the workers' movement.
There's talk about Collective being the party that Jeremy Corbyn might join after the elections, and that is a private party. And so far, no democratic structures, etc. I mean, it would give socialists perhaps something, a pond to swim in, but it would be very difficult, as it was in Momentum, especially towards the end after the coup, which, as you say, I think there was an email going out from Jeremy Corbyn saying, vote for John Lanzman's new constitution, etc. So that's a terrible thing. Quickly, Green Party, is that an alternative? And lots of people are putting it forward.
Sure. Well, my own take on elections is it's all about tactics, and therefore you have to have some long-term view. So I wouldn't rule anything out as a principle. I haven't looked it up, but I've been told, for example, maybe it was in a private letter, that Frederick Engels, of course, was based for most of his life in Britain, at one point was urging the working class movement, when we only had the Liberals and the Tories before the formation of the Labour Party. He actually did toy with the idea of saying, well, maybe we should call upon workers to vote Tory to punish the Liberals, to send a message, you can't take working class votes for granted. Now, remember, in those days, that would have been skilled workers, that would have been male workers. But, the organizations of the left, however small they were, did have the ear of important sections of that constituency. Okay, so voting Green isn't something I would, if someone did that, I wouldn't sort of get on my high horse and say, that's completely unprincipled. You sell out. But in the same way, if someone wants to accuse me of selling out for saying I'd vote for a mainstream Labour candidate if they were faced with just a Tory, Lib Dem, Reform, or whoever. Okay, I'm a sellout. But that's because I have a strategy that still says, I think that's the correct analysis, that the Labour Party is a bourgeois workers' party, that we ought to be working in the trade unions. If the trade unions are affiliated to the Labour Party, then we should use the trade unions to influence the Labour Party. That sort of makes sense to me in terms of strategy. But voting Green, remember, isn't a workers' party of any sort. Its origins are actually in a very dodgy, right-wing, fascistic grouping. What was his name? Was it Edward Goldsmith? Way back, didn't they form the People's Party or something like that, that then became the Ecology Party, that then became the Green Party? Either way, it isn't about its past. It's more a question of where can we go with the Green Party. And my fear is with the British, well, I shouldn't say British, should I? I should say the Green Party in England and Wales, is that by its nature, it has the possibility of going, and Tina, you know more about it than I do, it has the possibility of going exactly the same way as the Green Party in Germany, which began, I don't know its deep history, but I remember it when it was a radical Green Party, and you had the clash between the fundies and the Realos. The Realos won and a lot of the relos came from the Fundy wing, and they end up in government. They end up backing, NATO war in, wasn't it, Afghanistan, and now we have, the Green Party in a very unpopular coalition urging increase so-called defence spending. So, looking at the Green Party, I wouldn't look at it in a strategic fashion. I wouldn't look at it as a vehicle for socialism. That doesn't mean that as a matter of principle, one couldn't vote, because in my view, there are no principles in terms of you must vote this, you can't vote that, you must vote left. No, it's about calculation. So voting is about tactics, but you then have to explain why you're advocating this or that tactic. And in terms of comrades, I do understand it, because when you look at the sort of surface appearance, or you actually want to dig down into the program, there's no question that the Green Party is standing to the left of Keir Starmer's manifesto that he's just launched. But it is a question of class analysis. It is a question about socialist perspectives that lead me to say, well, personally, I wouldn't advocate such a course.
What about the role of the unions then? Last question before I bring in comrades from the floor. Some people are arguing that we need to call for a vote for Labour and give it as big a majority as possible, because what will happen, I mean, you touched on that, the crisis of expectations. What will happen is that it will inevitably bring the unions into conflict with the Labour Party, Starmer's leadership. There will be fighting and there will be struggles, and eventually the end game is that the unions will break from the Labour Party and form another Labour representation committee, perhaps, as was set up in 1900. As far as strategies go, do you find that a good strategy?
Well, I think, your laughter sort of conveys my feelings about it. Look, I'm old enough to have quite vivid memories and disappointments, I hasten to add, of the 74 Labour government. Here you are, you've just had a miners' strike, the second miners' strike. There you are, you're sitting in the dark. I thought that the working class in Britain, and so did the bourgeoisie, was so strong that we stood some short distance away from taking power. The Times, from my memory, I can't remember exactly what date, but around this time was talking about Britain being ungovernable. This was at the time of where there was serious talk and some moves, in terms of having a coup. So, okay, but then what happened? Yes, trade union power saw the fall of Edward Heath. And what we then had is a whole series of deals between the left trade union movement. Jack Jones and Hugh Scanlon come to mind. That would now be Unite, because it was the TNG, Transport Union, and the Engineering Union. But these were sort of champions of the left. The Communist Party promoted them at the TUC Labour Party conference. They would give their speech. But okay, what did it end in? Yes, it ended in the rank and file rebelling, not in the trade unions breaking from Labour. And yes, then it led, precisely as I said, to the election of Margaret Thatcher, who broke trade union power. Okay, second time round, 1997, the idea, at least in my head, that Tony Blair was promising so much that it would lead to such a scenario, which is what the comrades on the left, many comrades on the left, were saying. Trade unions would break. All you need is, one big demonstration or one big strike, and Blair will fall, and then it's us. I thought at the time was delusional. And okay, I was right. I wish I was wrong. I wish if only a big Labour majority would then give way to a strike wave, or trade unions fighting the Labour Party and then forming, and then you said exactly the right thing, and then forming another Labour Party, and to imagine that Labour Party Mark II would be different compared with what it was Labour Party Mark I from 1900. As I argued, if we look at the source of what makes the Labour Party a bourgeois workers' party, it's not just the trade unions who are affiliated to it. It's the nature of trade unionism itself, which is the bourgeois politics of the working class. Sharon Graham is a classic example, but they're all doing it. I'm not criticizing trade unions for being trade unions, by the way. That is their nature. So what would it produce? It would produce another bourgeois workers' party. It would produce another bureaucracy. Okay, so why repeat the 20th century? There was enough death and horrible suffering in the 20th. So we don't want to repeat the 20th century. We want to learn the lessons of the 20th century. So no, I'm not looking forward. I don't think it'll happen, of course, but I'm not looking forward to a repeat of a Labour Party Mark II. And I'm certainly not looking forward to then. I mean, I won't be around for another 100 years. And I don't think many of us will, to then turn round and say, I told you so. That's not what politics.
But we need to have an active approach to the unions.
Course, exactly.
I mean, we need to fight for democracy and to actually give the rank and file a bigger say in it. And sorry, I had to have one more question, which is the question of the future of the Labour Party. And, you know, lots of people think that that's it now. I mean, the left, and it is hard to argue, the left has been crushed and it has been extinguished from all structures. It has been wiped out. I mean, they will not make another mistake like they did with Corbyn, which was a mistake, wasn't it? It was an accident. They will not allow that kind of accident to happen again. How do you think this, you know, where could there be a space within the Labour Party, and sort of related, fighting for democracy in the Labour Party? What changes would you have liked Corbyn had done in his time? You mentioned the deselection, reselection process, etc. But there are vast areas in the Labour Party that should have been democratized and that weren't even touched. Regional structures remained in the hands of the right, for example. There was no attempt to change that. So how do you see that the future of the Labour Party, and what kind of reforms would we fight for if we could?
Well, we can, but it won't get very far. So yeah, I think that if you're in an affiliated trade union, you want to be putting demands through your trade union into Labour Party conferences, which can be ignored then if there's a Labour government. So yes, you can do that, and I would certainly urge comrades in affiliated trade unions to do that. But it's quite conceivable, isn't it, that in terms of, you know, what you actually said, that might well be the case, that the Labour Party, in terms of the potential to democratize it, has been, to use a phrase from the time of Blair, completely concreted over. And there's absolutely no possibility of change. Well, back in the day of Blair, I could listen to that argument. I wasn't convinced by that argument, but sort of, you know, it did reflect a reality, just like, in terms of your question, reflected a definite reality in terms of CLPs, Labour Party conference and all the rest of it today. But okay, so they never allow it to happen again. But that depends, doesn't it? It depends on the class struggle. You know, one thing we do know is if the working class is in movement, if the working class is confident, then they're prepared to give concessions. And so, yeah, the more confident, the stronger the working class is, the more likely they are to concede what at present time they go, well, never allow that again. They would concede anything, indeed, in terms of the ruling class, if it meant them remaining the ruling class. So they would be quite prepared to, as they've done, allow wide-ranging nationalizations, one person, one vote, which, if you went back to the 19th century, would have been considered in Britain something approaching an obscenity, a madness. Votes for women, all women, again in the same way. So they will be prepared to concede massive advances for the working class. Of that, I'm convinced. The real question is that what we need to do is win the working class. Yes, to take those concessions, to use those concessions, such as one person, one vote, and not stop there. That we need to actually use those concessions to go all the way. And in my own conception, that means aiming to come to power, state power, for the working class, not only in Little Britain, but at the very least across Europe, and then going further into other continents and other countries. I think that is the sort of perspective that we need, which is massive compared with where we are today. But I think that's the only realistic route forward when it comes to a strategy, a realistic, a viable strategy for socialism. So, of course, we should fight them in the Labour Party, fight them, getting a bit Churchillian here, fight them in the trade unions. We should fight the bourgeoisie and opportunism wherever we can. But for that, we need our own organisation. And I think that is the key question. Not working in the organisations of the Labour bureaucracy. We need our own independent organisation, which allows us to do that effectively, allows us to win the battle of democracy in the trade unions, potentially in the Labour Party. But we shouldn't bank on the Labour Party in the same way we shouldn't bank on the trade unions. They can become so bureaucratized that we need to go around them. That's a matter for the future. But I wouldn't, as I say, I wouldn't rely on it. But on the other hand, I think I'd be very stupid if I just dismissed the trade unions, dismissed the Labour Party, dismiss local councils, dismiss Parliament. I wouldn't dismiss Parliament, no.
It's an arena of the class struggle, isn't it? Just as unions are. Comrades, especially people with a different point of view, would be interesting to hear from you. First person with a hand up was Malcolm.
I think I have a quite different point of view, actually. One of the things that I mean, I've been in the Labour Party on and off, but mostly off. And each time, last time I was in it, I constantly read one of the rules in the rule book that said the Labour Party was a democratic socialist party. Well, make me laugh. I mean, what a joke. It's never been either of those things. As far as I can make out, it's never been a socialist party. Democratic, I don't really know. And I'm not really interested in the Labour Party anymore. But what I think is quite, I don't know, weak really, is people aren't properly informed about Britain anyway, which is in fact sort of religious monarchy-led oligarchy. I mean, there's no real democracy there at all. I mean, especially the voting system gives you a choice between A or B, and whether A is better than B or not is one thing. And I don't think people are properly informed of the fact that they are not living in a democracy. I don't know what they think a democracy is, but a democracy is government by the people. And it certainly has never been government by the people. But the whole construction of the British state, and most countries' states, as far as I know, is we talk about the ruling class. The reason they're called the ruling class is because they're the ruling class, right? I mean, they're not only in Britain, they're in every country. And a ruling class is basically an oligarchy headed by a monarchy. And we end up with a two-party state. So there's virtually no way by electing anybody, as far as I can see, that you'd ever get anywhere near a socialist society. The other thing I wanted to say was, sorry, excuse me, is Jack Conrad constantly referred to the working class. Well, as far as I can make out, working class is somebody who lives on what they earn from when they go to work, which means, I mean, the working class conjures up the view that when I was young, perhaps still existed: steelworks, shipyards, coal mines, and so on and so forth. I obviously don't come from any sort of background of working class, though I have, in fact, in my life worked on a concrete gang and building site, and I've also worked as a bus conductor. So I don't know if that counts as being working class. But I mean, the idea that if your sole income is what you earn makes you working class. And the problem is that a lot of people think of themselves as what's known as middle class, i.e. they're not working class, and i.e. they're somehow better or different. And there was an article in the paper I read recently where I live in Portugal, and the lady pointed out, who's a lawyer, that in fact people who take this view vote against their best interests, because their best interest is socialism as much as somebody, I don't know, working in a coal mine. I mean, because they are dependent on on National Health Service, they're dependent on a pension, all of those sort of things. But the idea they think they're somehow going to join the ruling class means they vote against their own interests. And those people ought to be educated. I mean, they ought to be educated. I mean, I don't know what percentage of people don't vote, and I don't know why they don't vote. I'm sure somebody does. But I guess they don't vote because they just see no point. I mean, what point they expect from it, I don't know. But that's what I expect. So the two things I'd just like to go back over is I think that people ought to inform everybody of the real situation with regard of democracy, and they ought to be informed about the fact that they are working class and they shouldn't be ashamed to say so. Thank you.
Do you want to reply, Jack?
Yeah, great. Well, Malcolm, I thought you were going to come out with something different, because I basically agreed with about 99% of what you said. So I agree with you. In terms of Labour Party democracy, it would be a good idea. Of course, there are elements in the Labour Party, that are democratic, but there are all sorts of, what do they call them, barriers, all sorts of mechanisms to prevent democracy. So, for example, annual conference is meant to be sovereign. Well, yeah, except prime ministers, Labour leaders can ignore it. And you then have the trade union vote and laws and judges and judicial review. They've got all sorts of ways to actually prevent people exercising their democratic rights. And of course, in terms of the Labour Party, I mean, it has, undergone a fundamental change. First of all, with the individual membership structure and the adoption of so-called, I'm glad you say that the Labour Party has never been committed to socialism, because I don't think Clause 4 is a socialist commitment. Either way, that then went hand in hand with leaving behind its traditional affiliate structure, i.e. barring the Communist Party and expelling communists who were dual members of the Labour Party. So I absolutely agree with you on that. I don't agree that we should simply say that Britain has got no democracy and there's no point to voting. I think you're right that when you're faced with Rishi Sunak's party and Keir Starmer, there's bugger all choice in the matter. So I'm reminded in that sense, I'm sure you know the phrase of Charlie Marx when he talked about the working class have the right to vote for who's going to misrepresent them or who's going to repress them for every 4 or 5 years. That's what we're voting for on July the 4th. That's absolutely right. And therefore, our job, I think, is not to dismiss the vote, but to construct something that is worthwhile voting for. And that doesn't mean I've got any illusions that that's all you do. You know, you have a vote on, I presume July the 4th is a Thursday. You have a vote on July the 4th. You elect a socialist majority, and then you expect the army, the monarch, the judges, the House of Lords, the capitalist class, the United States, NATO, MI5, etc., 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 to fold their arms while we carry out our program. Of course not. Of course, that would be naive. But I am saying that constructing something that can win a social majority and use elections to build that social majority, I don't think should be just dismissed. I don't know whether you are dismissing that, but I think you're right about July the 4th. That's certainly true. Okay, who's in what class? Well, just because you get a wage, I understand from my news today, I mean, I'm being facetious here, of course, but I was listening about Elon Musk and his 53 billion package. Now, if one was foolish, one could say that's his pay packet. Clearly, what we're talking about is this is a result of the exploitation of labor power, and we can go into the ins and outs of that. No, but there is a middle class. How we define it, I don't think is fixed. But there's clearly a managerial class that exists that serves the capitalist class. The capitalist class, in terms of the Elon Musks of the world, are so few in number that they do rely on others. Either way, you're right. A lot of people, I mean, well, I don't know how old you are, Malcolm, but I mean, I remember when we were told that everyone in Britain is now middle class. I mean, from the sort of 50s and 60s. I was told, of course, as you no doubt were, when I sort of talked at school about us living in a capitalist society, my teachers would laugh. I said, boy, don't you know anything? We don't live in a capitalist society. We don't send people up chimneys anymore. You know, we've got unemployment benefit. Everyone has the right to a house. You know, we have schools for people. You can vote. So apparently we didn't live in a capitalist society. But no, you're right. You're absolutely right that a lot of people who do consider themselves middle class are actually working class. What I would say, and again, what you've lived through, is where a lot of those people, like nurses, who consider, I mean, my sister's become a nurse. Oh, she's doing very well for herself, sort of type-eyed. Well, they now go on strike, don't they? They are now members of trade unions. And even if you take that, I don't know what you want to call it, but the RCN, Royal College of Nursing, even that went on strike. So, you know, this is a dynamic process. And all I would say, you're absolutely right. We as socialists need to be educating people. That's certainly true. But life educates people as well. And class struggle educates people in movement, people in collective movement educate themselves. So I'm not just talking about economic struggle, but even just economic struggle. People turn around and say, well, yeah, I'm working class. They learn it because, you know, it's like when you have a picket line. Do you cross the picket line? Well, my local hospital, even doctors, as you know, junior doctors are starting to call themselves working class, and they are increasingly. You know, their conditions are deteriorating, their life prospects are no longer, you know, the automatic smooth route up into being a consultant and driving into the hospital, you know, from your private practice in your Rolls Royce. You know, increasingly these people are in long-term debt. And yeah, they need to recognize that the future lies for them, not in the Rolls Royce individualized route, but collective action by joining together with other members of the working class. So, you know, as I said, I mean, a nuance here and a nuance there. I agreed with what you said, Malcolm.
Quick follow-up question from Malcolm, I think.
Sure.
Yes, I think the problem of class is very complicated. I remember reading a book, I think it was by a man called Zweig, who wrote a book in about 1948, who actually went into the working class, and nobody at that time knew anything about the working class, and he found working class people have quite standard lives in many respects. And there were earlier book by Jack London where he asked a taxi driver or had to go past Spitalfields, and the taxi driver said, "Nobody goes past Spitalfields. I mean, you just don't." And he went past Spitalfields and he entered a world which nobody knew about, which was, the desperately poor people. I mean, I don't think those situations, well, it might apply in many countries in the world, probably where they make all the clothes I'm wearing, but in the society I live in, I mean, obviously, there's sort of this muddled things like people buying a house and then not living in it because they've gone to live somewhere else and getting somebody else to pay the mortgage, and maybe they own a few shares and so on and so forth. But if people's life fell apart because they didn't get their income, then I guess they're working class. Now, if you start talking about CEOs being working class because they earn £3.8 million a year, I don't know where you grade away from that and say, well, they're not working class because they obviously part of the ruling class. So I think it's a very complicated thing, but I don't think that people on the left do themselves much favors by constantly talking about the working class and the class struggle. I mean, I don't think they do, because it means it alienates a lot of people that it shouldn't do. That's all I would like to say, really. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, Ian was next.
Good evening. Generally speaking, I completely agree with you, Jack, but I just wanted to clarify a couple of points. I appreciate, because I lived at that time as well. I'm 63 now, and I remember the Ted Heath government very well. But you wouldn't have called for a vote for Ted Heath over Harold Wilson. And after all, Harold Wilson, believe it or not, was the left candidate in 1963 against George Brown. It's hard to imagine it now, but there we go. And also, of course, Ted Heath at the time was remembered as one of the worst kind of prime ministers we'd had, in a sense, because we'd had the Industrial Relations Act, which ironically had seen the biggest recorded demonstration and was right up until the Iraq War demonstration. It was an incredible time. Of course, what was different about it was that there was an organised trade union movement and an organised left, which has sadly declined dwindled very badly. But I think what I really wanted to clarify was in the pages of Weekly Worker, there's been a sort of bit of a discussion about, well, hang on, so we talk about the Labour Party as a bourgeois workers' party. Why not just simply another bourgeois party? I see it talked about as the sort of the second 11 of the Tory party. When in fact, in many regards, the Labour Party is the preferred party of the bourgeoisie. The Financial Times called for a Labour vote under Tony Blair. And it's easy to see why the bourgeoisie would actually prefer a Starmer government to more of the kind of floundering nonsense of a decaying Tory party. Somewhere along the way, I think in Weekly Worker, there's this talk about, well, if the Labour Party is no longer a bourgeois workers' party, but merely a bourgeois party, as some left groups would contend, where was the point of change? Where was the fracture, as it were? I think movements in social movements are more like the movements of tectonic plates than anything kind of linear. So you get long periods of stasis and then fractures and violent upheavals. It's hard to point to a moment, but if you had to point to a moment, isn't the Labour government of James Callaghan an interesting one? Because arguably James Callaghan was the first monetarist prime minister started the process, which was continued to its logical conclusion by Margaret Thatcher. From that point of view, there's been an interesting sort of realignment in British politics, where Thatcherism came to represent deindustrialization, a movement away from an organized industrial proletariat in favor of what we have now as Britain as a kind of offshore tax haven and financial center, in the hope that would bring enough revenue to run an economy on. Whereas in fact, and the Labour Party now effectively is, as I say, the preferred party of the bourgeoisie, and something which is more capable of marshalling the working class behind the interests of capital than the Tory party can. And from that point of view, we're seeing a steady realignment in politics. In a way, the Labour Party has really sort of filled the gap that was left by when Ted Heath's defeat. The only other thing I wanted to mention was about the Workers' Party. I mean, I too was very happy to see Rishi Sunak's discomfort when George Galloway was elected. But we do have a problem with the Workers' Party, in a sense. I mean, that sort of red-brown politics poses a difficulty in this, I would argue, because it now poses a kind of pole of attraction, which makes it very difficult to stand as a genuine left-winger. Because we know that the conversations that will follow, why don't we all just get behind the Workers' Party? Why don't we all just support this bastardized version of socialism? When in fact, of course, we have very real disagreements with them. I think I know what you're going to say, but nevertheless, I think it does pose a real difficulty when it comes to actually trying to stand against something with a bit of a head of steam behind it. And it just means that effectively any kind of genuinely on the left ends up playing second fiddle to this. And finally, I just wanted to mention a little bit about class. Speaking as a sociologist, all of sociology comes into being in an effort to prevent the possibility of socialism. Sociology effectively is an ideological wing akin to Keynesian economics, and discussion around class in terms of how you spend your money or lifestyle choices, all the rest of it is the kind of nonsense that sociology has thrown up and has perpetuated. And arguably, sociology would have just faded into insignificance were it not for the importance of social democracy as a means of trying to prevent the possibility of socialism. It is a necessary adjunct to it. That doesn't mean to say we should throw away, by the way, all the insights that we gain from sociology in terms of, for example, an analysis of inequalities in health or whatever else. They're there as useful empirical data. But that was all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Jack.
Okay. Where are we? Yeah, just to quick comment in terms of Malcolm. I also remember Malcolm sort of vaguely. I can't remember who the authors were. You might. The study of the affluent workers, and this was specifically based sociology study, Ian. So you most likely know it as well. But it was based on a study of Luton car workers. And Luton car workers had never been on strike, ever, right, since the car plant was first established. And what was beautiful about this book is that, of course, it said, well, these workers don't go on strike. They're not interested in militant industrial action. They're just interested in buying their own houses. And goodness gracious, as the book came out, these affluent workers went on strike for the first time, and not, I hasten to add, for the last time. And again, I've heard, because I remember it, all the stories about the miners. See, apparently it was only miners from the 1970s that were militant. As we went towards the 80s, we were assured that young miners, they're not interested in strikes and all this militancy stuff. And then we had 84, 85. In terms of people being frightened, well, the media is going to try to frighten them with everything. And quite frankly, if we adopted, what was acceptable to the mass media, then we'd cease to be socialists. Would cease to use our own language about the left wing. But I don't think we should do that. I think we've got our own history. We've got our own aims, and we should insist on using our own language, and we should win people to use this language because it's powerful, because we've got a history of working class solidarity. We've got a history of struggling for socialism. We might have failed in terms of that struggle, but that's our vision. And so I don't think that we should take a view that if we use frightening language to basically people who are liberal, that will put them off. I think precisely the opposite. I think if we don't use our language, if we don't fight for our language and we don't fight for our program, we don't bring those people towards us. We do the opposite. So I actually think that the attempt not to put such people off has the exact opposite effect that you're suggesting. Okay, in terms of your remarks, I was joking. I hope you got that about Elon Musk and CEOs. I hope you didn't think that I actually thought they were members of what I would call the working class. I'm simply saying that this is decided by who, on the one hand, clearly benefits from surplus value, from the realization of surplus value in the form of profit, Elon Musk. But I'm also saying there is a layer of the population that, because these people, there might be very few of them, but because they are multi-billionaires, are able to keep a whole class of people, in that sense, using golden chains. That these people become loyal to the capitalist class, even if they aren't members of the capitalist class. And to me, it's decided by struggle. So, I mean, if you look at people who are prepared to go out on strike, well, in general, you would say that they are members of the working class. People who are prepared to join a trade union, people who approach questions collectively rather than just individuals. These people are definitely part of the working class, and class is a dynamic question. It's not simply stuck. We're not born into a class and then that's it. Class is made and remade. And, the working class, clearly sections of it can be recruited into the middle class. The tendency is, though, that they aren't. The tendency is actually, although they want to call us middle class, more and more of us are working class. So I'm reminded in that sense, Ian mentioned the Financial Times, because this is a paper that operates both sides of the Atlantic. I can remember reading a supplement, color supplement in the FT, and it was about the American middle class. I said, well, this might be interesting. I pick it up, and it's about someone who works in a supermarket. And, I just, what, middle class? No, in America, unless you're poor, unemployed and, a drug addict and living on the street, because there ain't no workers in America. Until recently, I noticed. Either way, no, people who work in supermarkets, people who work in hospitals, teachers, people who work in docks, people who put the lights on for me, people who drive buses. I know there aren't any conductors anymore, but people who work on the buses, they are members of the working class, and they discover that pretty damned quickly, whatever it says, in terms of sociologists saying that we're all middle class now. Note, just the paradox of it, that in America, showing how the left has failed, it was, right-wing demagogues, I'm thinking of Donald Trump, that starts talking about the working class and how they've been done down by the liberal elite. and I think I could be wrong. Again, Tina, you know much more about it than I do. I'm thinking of the alternative for Germany, for example. I don't know that, so I'm sort of on thin ice there. But certainly in France, National Rally talks the language of class. Of course, it turns it against us and says that the main allegiance we should have is the nation. And okay, coming on to Ian's, I think, you know, the advantage of having some history is we see that things are new, but we also see that some things ain't so new. And I'm thinking of the first Labour government that would have had its colonial secretary, a Liberal, so Ramsay MacDonald, the firebrand anti-war activist, became Prime Minister, and it commits to continuing running the British Empire. Okay, the second Labour government under Ramsay MacDonald cuts unemployment benefit, suffers a huge split, makes the Labour Party unelectable for what, until 45 with Attlee. So we've seen sort of horrendous records of Labour governments. Just mentioning Attlee, okay, the National Health Service, a Liberal suggestion, but okay, wanted to keep the empire, supported NATO, supported colonial wars, banned the May Day demonstration in London. So, you know, of course, we do see new things, and we don't want to just say that Keir Starmer, there's no difference between him and Ramsay MacDonald. Of course, there is a difference. And I did say, I think that, you know, chances are that Keir Starmer will head the most right-wing Labour government in history. So, of course, but we have just been through the Corbyn period. And okay, Tina was absolutely right. That was an accident. But can you imagine something like that happening in the first 11 in the Tory party? And why did it happen? Precisely because left-wingers could join it, right? Precisely because of its history of having a left wing. And yeah, we could have done far more. The leadership that we were provided with by Jeremy Corbyn and his straight leftist advisors was appalling. He thought he could appease. Our problem is we allowed him to do it. We didn't challenge him. And I am not including myself, by the way, in that. We did our best. It was by no means effective, but we at least tried. Too many comrades on the left simply said, we don't want to upset the apple cart for Jeremy. Get him elected first, as if Queenie 2, QE2, would have picked up the phone to him and invited him to the palace, and the Parliamentary Labour Party would have voted confidence in him. But we could have done more. Anyway, all I'm arguing is that I think the Labour Party, just like the trade unions, no matter the bureaucracy, still remains, I think you said it, Tina, a site of struggle. I mean, if I think back, again, I'm sort of being a bit of a boring old fart here, but I think I'm right to say that the union today, Unite, Sharon Graham's union, is basically the merger of three big unions. The AEU, formerly headed by the guy I mentioned, Hugh Scanlon, Transport Union, Jack Jones, but also the EETPU, in short, the Electricians Union, that used to be led by members of the Communist Party, that after a scandal banned members of the Communist Party from holding office and put in all sorts of restrictions on communists. And that, of course, is something we've seen in many trade unions, not least in the 1950s. Did that mean that the EETPU had simply become a bosses union? Well, when one looks back at Wapping and the use that Murdoch made of it. You could have made that conclusion, but it ends up joining McCluskey's, or it ends up with McCluskey heading it. Now, I'm not saying McCluskey, by the way, is a socialist class fighter, but I am saying he's a normal, typical left Labourite trade union leader who's using the bourgeois politics of the working class to get the best deal for his members. So yes, of course there's change and we need to keep looking at the Labour Party. All I would argue is I don't see any qualitative change between 2019 and 2024. Of course there's been change and we would be foolish to ignore that. But nonetheless, I think we would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater if we said there's no difference between the Labour Party, which has got trade unions affiliated to it, and the Tory Party. I think that would be a misreading of history, and I think it will be a misreading of the present. But hey, life happens, and there could be that change. That's not inconceivable. The question is, what I was asked before, should we go back if that did happen and try to rerun history, but this time better? I think that that would be a mistake. If it happened, Tina's right, we should use it, but I don't think us relying on the trade union bureaucracy to get it right, and us pitted against the trade union bureaucracy as little groups or as isolated individuals, we wouldn't have a chance.
Thanks, Jack. Harry, we've got quite a few people with their hands up. Well, 3. So try and keep it a little bit short. Sorry, Harry.
Okay, thanks, Tina. You know that you don't win elections in Britain. We have never run elections. I mean, the exception was probably 1957 when Harold Macmillan told the country, "You've never had it so good." So in other words, come out, vote for us for more of the same. And I suppose then we were 10 years into the welfare state. But when you look in politics in Britain, tend to work in decades or decades and a half. I mean, the Wilson-Callahan government that brought in Thatcher, people wanted to see the end of that era. The landslide Labour victory of 97, people wanted to see the end of the Thatcher era. 2010, the end of the Blair-Brown era. And today is people now want to see what the end of what is effectively the Cameron era, at the end of it. Now, I don't think there's any real illusions to what they want. They know what they don't want. They're going to bring Labour in. But consciously, I don't think you will get any real serious consciousness that Labour is going to change anything. The fundamental crisis that Britain is faced now today, nothing is really going to change. And when you look at Parliament itself, I mean, look at the 8/8 in Parliament. There was many left, the Benns and the Skinners and all of those people. There was a left, and there was a left voice of the people in Parliament. Today there isn't. Okay, we've got Corbyn there, Diane Abbott there, but they're very simple. Parliament doesn't represent in any formation at all the voice of the people. You will hardly find it. And when you look at the attitude towards now Parliament, I mean, the Rochdale by-election it rocked Labour, but it rocked the establishment when people realised that there was a total rejection of the parliamentary main parties, and now we had an independent. The voter turnout that's now comes down and down and down. People are seeing that Parliament is not the answer. All of the parties are talking about change. None of the parties are going to bring about change. They're not going to go after the wealth of Britain. That's absolutely clear. It's a question of how much they tax the people, any more than they've already done so. But people are looking beyond Parliament now for a way out. Very quickly on the Stammer programme, because I think this is the main plank of the Stammer programme. His main defence spending increased, which is going to cost billions, 2.5% of GDP, the renewal of the Trident nuclear missile, then the maintenance of it. His objective will be to lead the UK with the US and NATO towards war with Russia. That is a key fundamental plank of what he intends now to do. He's going to need to raise the money from it, and we can talk about where that may come from. And indeed, there's a few examples. You see, what should we be doing this election? I'd agree with Jack. If it was an independent, I would vote for them. Maybe a Green, yes, fair enough. But that's not the main point. We need to explain to the working class that this election will solve absolutely nothing who comes to power. And the fundamentals, it's got to come from the people. Now, when you look at the struggle in the last few years, where's the struggle coming from? It's from workers through the trade unions. And that's what we do. So people are oriented, not towards the Labour Party, through the unions. It's where they fundamentally see the struggle taking place right now. The question is that this counter protest that we're going to get from Stammer immediately takes power, but we're also going to get it from the trade union bureaucracy. I mean, we had a general strike here in January. Loud and clear, biggest strike for over 50 years. Loud and clear, we need an inflation plus pay increase. What happened? All of the unions sold out on 5%. Every single one of them, half the cut in the pay increase. All of them. And the workers will be going through, in my opinion, a period where they will see the limitations of the trade union movement, their struggle within them, because the leaders will be playing a very, perhaps not a similar role, but a role all the same to hold back the working class. And therefore they will struggle. And I think the struggle will take a diversion from that struggle. The final point is where will the workers do and how do we build? Do we build another left party? Do we build another momentum? Do we build so on and so on? Only, to be quite honest with you, only to sell out in the working class. Generally speaking, that's the history of the whole thing. We need to build this movement from the top. We need to tell the workers the change comes from you, no one else. How do we develop that change? Independent workers' committees. That's what I think we need to be ringing. Is there a consciousness for it? I would say it almost certainly very, very little indeed. But we need to raise that call. And when I talk about independent, they've got to be independent of the trade union movement. Because if you latch into the trade union movement, you're going to be caught in all the apparatus and the controls that the trade union will have. We need workers. We need to build this movement from the bottom up, comrades. And that starts with workers' committees. And any major events in history has come from the workers' committees. And any organization that organizes those will gain the confidence of the working class. That, to me, is the way forward, to organize the working class at that level. And it's got to start at that level. That's what I think we should be explaining to workers. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Harry. Jack, shall I take a couple more? Because we're going to overrun otherwise. Or do you want to, if you want to reply directly to Harry now, you can if you prefer.
Oh, it's up to you, Tina.
I'll take one more. I'll take one more. Let's do that. Mark, please.
Yeah, sorry. I find myself agreeing a great deal with the last speaker, I have to say. I think the first thing to say is that many workers don't have illusions in the Labour Party. On the estate that I live, people have spoken to me and said that they've previously voted for Labour. Am I voting for Labour? And they're considering not doing so. Many of them will swap for the Green Party, to be honest with you. There is an independent standing who's been extremely active over the issue of Palestine. And I think I'll probably vote for her myself and go out and do a little bit of canvassing. I think the best the left can do at this current time is to make sure that it doesn't involve himself in spreading any illusions whatsoever in a Starmer government and actually warning people about what is going to come. That might sound silly for those of us who are pretty close to politics, but for most people, there still is some illusions. It's pretty mixed. It's a pretty mixed bag. And so we just need to make sure that's not the case as far as I can see. I think that the independents by standing are actually doing some of that, particularly in the major cities, in London and stuff. And I think they're to be congratulated in doing so. I did do a search of the left Labour MPs as such on their Twitter feeds today. It was about 10 I did a search from, simply putting the word Israel into all of their Twitter feeds, and you'll not be surprised to know that they haven't done anything or said anything on Israel since about November the 23rd last year, when they were instructed not to do so. That's about it, really. In Halifax, the best that we've been trying to do on the Trades Council is to just put out a series of short videos warning people about what's going to happen under a Labour government, talking about GP surgeries, water, and also what we think will be an issue locally is that I think people will expect better services from the local government. The Labour Party have run the local government for quite some time, and they've used the fact that it has been a Tory government to defend their cuts, and I think they may come under a bit of pressure as a consequences of that. That's about it. I suppose the very last point is, I guess we're not currently at this situation where fascist groups are attempting to mobilise in communities where there are racial tension, but we certainly have got obviously the possibility of Nigel Farage actually increasing tensions. And I suppose people need to ask whether they think the sort of actions that were taken by working class people in Barnsley yesterday should be supported, and whether and I believe ultimately if we were strong enough, we should always attempt to no platform fascists. I'm not suggesting that Farage is a fascist, but he is certainly mobilising people who are fascists. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thanks, Mark. And comrades who don't know this, I think people chased him out of Barnsley. He was in an open air bus, and basically he wasn't allowed to speak there. Jack, do you want to reply to both Harry and Mark
Yeah,
now?
that would be fine. Okay, Harry. I think the first thing I would say is I think capitalism and discontent go hand in hand. I'm too used to comrades on the left telling me who they spoke to on the bus stop the other day, and usually they report to me that people are dreadfully angry and dreadfully dissatisfied. But I actually think, as I said, that that's the permanent state of the working class in any capitalist country, including in the glorious boom years of the 1950s and 60s. Yes, of course, you're right that you can view things as going through a cycle when it comes to electoral politics. You could either view that as circular. We're certainly in a situation of where I don't know how long we've had a two-party system, but several hundred years. One party replaces another, but nothing fundamentally changes. That's certainly true. But on the other hand, the question that we need to get to grips with is, how do we break that cycle? And my own approach isn't to say that what's going to happen on July the 4th is an irrelevance. It's not to say that voting is an irrelevance. It's a question of how do we actually make it relevant. And so, of course, I've argued from the beginning. This is why I'm not adhering to the crisis of expectations. I think, Mark, you're absolutely right. People are either shrugging their shoulders and say, I'm not going to vote for that. But if we look at the opinion polls, something like 40% of those who say they're going to vote will vote for Labour, right? 20% or whatever the hell it happens to be will vote Tory. Labour clearly is way ahead, and clearly people have got some sort of illusions in Labour. But as you quite rightly say, so little that it hardly counts. And the so little is that they're going to be more competent than the Tories. But yeah, you're right. It's quite conceivable that in terms of taxes, in terms of wages, we could actually see a deterioration. We know that the Labour Party is committed to, Britain PLC. We know that not just, from was it 120 business leaders who signed up to support the Labour Party. We know it because of its history. We know it by its very nature. So it's quite right to tell people don't expect anything from the Labour Party. But do we really think that people are expecting much at all, if anything? No, they want to get rid of the old lot. Harry, you're absolutely right there. We want the end of this. The problem is that we end up with a Labour government, which then ends up with a Tory government. Okay, so your solution is to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that this voting stuff, for Parliament, I'm emphasising, that's a waste of time, and we should break with that, and we should set up these workers' committees. Well, if we look at the history of workers' committees, I presume you're thinking of things like Soviets. You had them in Germany, you had them in Austria, we had councils of action for a short time in Britain. You obviously had Soviets, well, the word comes from councils in Russia. But to me, what was crucial in Russia wasn't the existence of councils as such, it was the existence of the Bolshevik party. That with or without Soviets could command votes in the Tsarist election system, which was completely undemocratic. It wasn't one vote was equal. You had a workers' courier, bourgeois courier, priests' courier, and in terms of parliamentary representation, I think the working class got six MPs. The peasants were allowed some. Either way, the point would be that the working class needs to exercise state power. And it can only do that, in my opinion, if it organizes itself into a party with coherence, with discipline. It can't do it just on the basis of, well, we're all just workers. You need something with continuity. You need something with vision. And if you look at your workers' committees without such an organization, you say we should have nothing to do with the trade union bureaucracy. Why? Because they're bureaucrats and they would undermine it. Well, okay, so what would happen in a workers' committee would be it would develop its own bureaucracy, wouldn't it? Surely. Is it going to be immune from that? How are you going to guard against it? I don't see how. So to me, the question is party. And that's why, I'm a member of the CPGB, not because we are the party, but because we want such a party. Okay, and just lastly, I agree with you in terms of Labour, its perspectives on so-called defence spending, but I would add this. I actually myself think that the aim of the United States isn't Russia. I mean, does Russia now represent anything particular in the way of a threat to the United States? I mean, it's not even like it was in the 30s, 40s, 50s with official communism, with mass parties in Italy, France, etc., etc. No, it's China. That's my view. So I personally would view what's going on in Ukraine at the present time and the beefing up of NATO. I agree with you. Of course, Russia is a target, but the target at the end of the day is China, the world's second largest economy, which doesn't so much represent an ideological challenge to the United States, but a power challenge. Either way, I agree with you that the Labour Party, the Tory Party, the Democrats, the Republicans, they're all committed towards going to war. Now, whether that's a shooting war, we don't know, but the danger is that it could be. And the danger is, of course, that not only is Russia armed with nuclear weapons, so is China, let alone the United States. So how do we break from that danger? My own argument is that we need to take elections seriously by presenting a serious alternative. And even if it's your workers' committees, wouldn't they be advised to organize themselves in a party to actually challenge the existing parties, not with the illusion, as I've said before, that all we need to do is get a majority, and then the army, and then the police, and then the Secret Service, and the House of Lords, and the monarchy play along with our majority. They wouldn't do that. But this is the whole question. We would then have legitimacy, and we need legitimacy. We need to be acting on behalf of, and being in that sense, we need to be the majority. So I wouldn't give up on Parliament. That doesn't mean I dismiss your idea about workers' committees, but these things tend to come into existence when there's movement in the class, when there's a social crisis. And at the moment, I don't see such a social crisis. So I think we need a party that can operate both in periods of intense class struggle that produce your workers' committees and other such bodies, but also in periods like this, when things are at an appallingly low level. And okay, I readily admit the Palestine demonstrations have been fantastic, but I'm talking about the position of the ruling class being insecure, and unfortunately we cannot say that at the present time.
Do you want to reply to Mark as well?
I think I have really, Mark. I could add about no platforming, but I think that's a different subject tonight.
We did actually, the third person who was going to speak had to leave the meeting, so we have nobody else with their hand up. Do you have perhaps an overall one or two, summing up the key questions, the key takeaway points from this meeting, from your perspective?
I think we've been, we're all coming from different angles. We're all coming from different traditions, but I do think that we're saying many of the same things. And so, yeah, I think we're, at least in terms of those comrades who've spoken, we have no illusions in the Labour Party, obviously not. But we also think that the vast majority of the working class has no illusions either in the Labour Party. So maybe there'll be an uptick in strikes, but I don't really see why that's an inevitability. And even if there was, what's it going to lead to? So yeah, strikes would be a good thing, but what we need is strikes that win. And we haven't seen much of that against the Tory government. So why we'd see it so different under a Labour government, I'm somewhat mystified about. So yeah, I think we all need to be thinking not so much about what happens on July the 4th. I think we're I haven't heard anyone say Rishi Sunak and the Tories will win. I have actually heard that from one comrade on the left, and I just looked at him and said, "Are you mad?" I mean, maybe he's right and I'm completely wrong. But no, it's after July the 4th. It's what we need to be doing after July the 4th. Do we carry on just backing independence? It's great that they're standing. I agree with the warnings about the Workers' Party. I don't think that's the answer, but nor do I think that a Jeremy Corbyn, what's it called? Community or whatever the hell it's
Collective.
What's it called again?
Collective.
I fear a momentum Mark II. I don't think that's going to succeed. And so yeah, we need to be thinking about what sort of organization we need. And in my view, it needs to be committed to solid principles. It needs to be thoroughly democratic, and it needs to have a situation where minorities get a hearing. And I'm a minority. When minorities get a hearing, and at least they've got a chance, they're allowed to struggle to become a majority. And if we don't have an organization like that, I think that we, in that sense, become part of a dreadful cycle that unfortunately over recent decades have been a cycle of ever diminishing proportions. We haven't grown in strength, we haven't grown in influence. So I think we need to be together trying to break out of that cycle of failure. We've all got, at the moment, from what I hear, our different ways of doing it. But I think the more we talk and the more we struggle in common, the more chance we've got of coming to the right answers.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I think the key question of democracy and allowing different viewpoints to be heard is a point we've been making plenty in these discussions, and that's why we're holding these discussions and encouraging debate and different views to be heard. But that's the working class has plenty of different views amongst its members, and if you tell them you have to switch off your faculties when you join this or that party, they're very unlikely to join an organization in any significant numbers. So yes, after July the 5th, the 4th, our real work begins. Thanks very much, Jack. Next week, we'll be hosting a discussion. We hoped it would be a discussion of various different organizations standing in elections. Unfortunately, so far it's only Chris Williamson who's confirmed he'll be coming, and Communist Future, Katrina Rylands, who's standing in Manchester. Even if it's just those two, I'm sure that'll be an interesting discussion. The Tusk has unfortunately not replied to us, neither has Collective, which I think does say something, unfortunately. Comrades, good night, and thank you for a very interesting debate.
Thank you very much.